I don't know where I get my love for rocks and mining. None of my people were ever associated with mining in any way. However, I certainly have a love for mining, and the mines, speculative mines, have been very, very good to me down through the years. During the period of mining, 20,265,000 pounds of copper, 841,276 ounces of silver, 39,000 ounces of gold, 4 million pounds of zinc, 500,000 pounds of lead, and several thousand pounds of cadmium were mined from the bowels of Mt.Sicker. $6.5 million worth of ore. And that was the monetary force that propelled Duncan from a sleepy little agricultural town into the 20th century and prosperity, when she became a mining distribution point. The search at first was for iron ore, and it dates back to 1860. Gold was the thing they were after. But in 1893, an orphan child came into the picture, copper. The world was hungry for copper, and there had been outcroppings of copper noticed in the Cowichan district by various prospectors. In 1897, Henry Smith, a businessman in Duncan, Harry Smith I should say, and a partner, Robert Buzzard, discovered a very promising copper lead on Mt.Sicker. But in 1898, Harry Smith, after a big fire had been through on Mt.Sicker, discovered a very excellent outcropping of copper, staked a claim which he named after his daughter, Lenora, and that year he formed a company with several other businessmen. The Lenora and British Columbia, Lenora, Mt.Sicker, and BC Development Company. That year, they drove an adit. An adit, by the way, is an excavation horizontally into a mountainside. A tunnel has two ends, an adit has one end. They drove this adit 370 feet into the mountain. And the shareholders decided to sell to a group headed by Henry Croft. And he formed the Lenora Mt.Sicker Copper Company. Croft was the son-in-law of the coal magnate Robert Dunsmuir, who of course had put the railroad through from Esquimalt to Nanaimo. And Croft apparently had lots of money. He was an Australian geologist, and so promising was the ore body that he found on Mt.Sicker that by 1899, not only had he formed a company, started mining, he built a town site, had a town site laid out and built houses. The town site had a general store, a school, and quite a number of houses, and a wagon road had been completed from Westholme. By 1900, Croft found that he couldn't transport all his ore by horses down teams down to Westholme Station. So he hired a man called Haggerty to build a tramway to the E&N from Mt.Sicker siding. Now, Mt.Sicker siding is halfway between Stratford's Crossing and Westholme. It would be hard to designate it exactly now. So Haggerty, who took the contract to build the tramway, built a narrow gauge railway with wooden rails, and the cars were drawn by horses and loaded on the car. The ore was loaded on the cars at Mt.Sicker siding.
Seems a bit precarious, because were there ties between the rails, or didn't they sort of go apart and the wagons would have kept coming off, I would have thought?
I would say that the ties were buried adequately so that the horses could run between them. Probably a narrow gauge, probably one horse would dray several cars.
Going downhill anyway.
Yes. The ore went to Ladysmith, and from Ladysmith Wharf it was shipped to Venanda. There was a smelter on Texada Island at Venanda, and that had been running some years. There were gold and copper mines at Venanda. In 1900, Croft decided that he would build a railway, or I should say have a railway built to the siding. It was 6 miles. This was done, and they bought a 10-ton Shay locomotive. The ore was then being shipped to Tacoma smelter.
From Ladysmith, I suppose.
From Ladysmith, yes. Harry Smith, after staking the Lenora mine, moved up the hill and found another quite good outcropping, and he staked another claim, the Tyee. He held that for a little time, then sold his interest in the Tyee to the Tyee Development Company. There was a very prominent geologist and financier in the district, T.A. Wood, who was one of the partners in the WAE claim up the Cook-Sila River. I held those claims adjoining that and adjoining claims later. And it was the first discovery of copper in the Cook-Sila country. T.A. Wood took over the management of Tyee Copper Company, and that company paid Harry Smith $5,000 for his share in the Tyee. So apparently he had other partners as well. Harry Smith opened Duncan's Emporium, and in the top floor of the Duncan's Emporium, he printed the Duncan Enterprise.
Now, this Duncan's Emporium, that was in Duncan, was it?
That was in Duncan.
Or in Duncan's, as it was in those days.
Yes. Well, it was called Duncan's Station or Duncan's. Mm-hmm. I remember the postmark cancellation. Duncan's Station was used until 1926, till they changed it to Duncan, BC. In 1900, the Tyee Copper Company, which was formed in London, sent Claremont Livingston out to manage the company. Claremont Livingston was the father of the Cowichan district's only district-born titled person, Air Marshal Sir Philip Livingston, born at Cowichan Bay, and he died in the Cowichan district after a very prestigious life. The machinery for the Tyee mine was hauled from Duncan, and Elias Castley built a road from the Davy farm off what was then the Island Highway, or as they called it then, Victoria Nanaimo Trunk Road. Yes. And Angus McKinnon hauled the machinery, some of which weighed 4.5 tons. I remember Angus McKinnon telling me about some of the stories, the hair-raising exploits moving the machinery up, but he said it was very remunerative.
I'm sure it would be, but my goodness.
And Frank Lloyd moved his sawmill from Westholme up to the Tyee mine. At that time, they decided to build a town site on the Tyee site as well. So you had the two town sites, and there was also a post office.
For each one? Or just
for each one. And both had Mt.Sicker cancellation on it. The building boom in 1901 produced the second post office, and the Mt.Sicker Hotel had been built at the Lenora, and the Brenton Hotel at the Tyee. And at the Tyee there was a school, a church, a general store, and by the fall of 1901, just a little over 1,700 people were living in the two town sites on Mt.Sicker. By 1901, Croft had hired two Butte, Montana contractors, Bellinger and Breen, to build a smelter for his ore from the Lenora mine on land that he owned at Osborne Bay. The smelter was built, and a railroad completed to the smelter in 1902. And the railroad that they built from Mt.Sicker to Crofton was 11.3 miles long. Across, down Mt.Sicker, across West Home Flats, and along the side, the north slope of Mount Richards, dropping down to Crofton.
That's an incredible piece of engineering, that bit on Mount Richards, where Mt.Sicker was something too, but Mount Richards with the switchbacks.
A lot of stonework in there, still visible. The smelter at Crofton was built to handle 400 to 500 tons of ore per day, and it blew in September 1902, and approximately 400 men were employed. I knew two workers there very well. Horace Excel, who lived there for years, and when he left Cowichan Station, we bought his place, and George Bradshaw. I remember George Bradshaw telling me he came out from England, landed here on a Saturday. On a Monday morning in 1907, he was working in the smelter. Mr. Excel had worked in the smelters in Chihuahua, in northern Mexico, and then he graduated to the smelter in Butte, Montana, and with quite a number of other men from Butte, Montana, probably lured by the contractors who came from there, he came to the smelter in Crofton. Croft, by the way, had represented Cowichan Electoral District as a member of the provincial parliament at one time.
He was a very distinguished man in the area, wasn't he?
He was, yes, and apparently well thought of, which the Dunsmuirs weren't. The Tyee Copper Company shipped ore over a wagon road to Somenos Station. Now, I don't remember the bunkers at Somenos Station, but and from there it went to Ladysmith, shipped to from Ladysmith to Tacoma. And in 1902, Claremont Livingston, the manager, hired Mr. Riblet to build an aerial tramway 3 1/3 miles long down to Tyee Siding. And by 1902, that was completed. I do remember very well the bunkers at Tyee. That is what we call Stratford's Crossing now. And that was rather a unique thing. The tramway carried the ore over a ridge 1,700 feet up the mountain. It rose to 2,000 feet, came over the ridge, then down to 100 feet, just 100 feet above sea level at Tyee Siding. The full buckets pulled the empty buckets back up.
Did the men ever use the empty buckets to get a quick ride back up again?
Yes, apparently so, because I remember the Dwyer sisters telling me not too long ago, last year I think it was, that their father used to ride up to the mine from Tyee Siding. Ladysmith Smelter blew in December of 1902. So from there on, the Tyee Copper Company had its own ores smelted at Ladysmith. And by 1903, the Tyee mine had 2 miles or more of underground workings, and it registered a profit of $550,000.
That was a lot of money in those days.
It was a lot of money. And that in 1902, the Richard III mine, which was to the west and up the to the east and up the hill from the Tyee mine, came into activity. C.H. Dickey was president of the company, and he was later MLA and MP for the district. The ore from the Richard III was shipped over the tramway, and it went to the Ladysmith smelter. But by 1903, the Lenora found itself in serious financial difficulties. So Crofton Smelter processed ore from the Wairika mine on the west coast of the island. The town site and towns of Mt.Sicker had none of the lawlessness that we read about in the United States mining towns. But there was one murder. In 1902, a prospector called Fred Beach, he was squiring a lady up on Mt.Sicker who spurned his attentions. He took a dim view of that, and he was going to take her life. He was shooting the town up at that time, and a good friend of his, one of the Bebo brothers who owned the Brenton Hotel, came out to try and remonstrate with him. Beach shot Bebo and then took to the hills. They had a posse out after him, and the lady that caused the trouble was told to stay in the hotel and not show her face. But Beach wasn't too far away, and the lady couldn't stay as she was told, put her head above the window. Beach shot, and she fainted. He thought that he had revenged the spurring of his love, and so he shot himself, and they found him next day. By 1904, the Lenora was in receivership. Houses were being sold for $2. The Mt.Sicker Hotel was on sale for $8 and had no takers. The smelter at Crofton in 1904 was sold to the Britannia Mining and Smelting Company. And the Lenora operated on a very small scale until 1906, when it closed down, and Frank Lloyd moved his mill to Mt.Sicker siding. Then in 1907, the Lenora was reactivated by a small company who took out roughly 1,700 tons of ore. But that was the end of the Lenora. The railroad was torn up in 1912. We are, by the way, on Smith's Mountain, west of Cowichan Station. And the mountain adjoining this to the south is Colvin's Mountain. And that is the mountain that held the King Solomon and the Bluebell, which were the main producers in this area. This was a portion of what was the Mabel and the Ruby and the Dora claims. And then, of course, they were abandoned after the bottom dropped out of copper. And when I picked them up and restaked the area, I named the two first ones, the Red Emma, after a Polish woman who always fascinated me with her brashness and force in organizing the unions in the garment industry in New York, and the Cornucopia, which of course is the Horn of Plenty.
Yeah.
Then the second one's south of that, the Swansea Girl, named after a famous claim in Arizona, in which $13 million worth of ore was mined.
You haven't had $13 million out yet, though, have you?
Not so far, no. And I hardly think it probable. And the fourth claim is the Mabel. I had a fairly close call. Some years ago I was examining a uranium mine at Basin in Montana. And I ignored the signs, "Keep out, very dangerous." I climbed over a barbed wire fence and went into the adit, and I could feel that something wasn't quite right. So I went in probably 50, 75 feet in there, and I could see that it was fairly dangerous. And I'd no sooner got out than a fair chunk fell out of the side. I don't know whether I had disturbed something, but I didn't try that again.
I would imagine not. No. Can we go in there and just walk in and have a look in there?
I never get tired of telling the stories of my valley. And during the 140 years of European settlement in the valley, there are 140 years of stories. The 4,000 years of settlement by the Indian people, there are 4,000 years of stories. So there are many stories to come yet. Very proud of Cowichan country, and I consider that it was a reward for perhaps a former life that God gave me the privilege of being born into this valley. I've never seen anywhere in the world I would sooner live permanently better than the place I was born.